Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we've seen If Beale Street Could Talk a second time.
Yes.
And in the meantime, last night, individually, we each watched Moonlight as well, as we said we would. Because, well, for me it was the first time I'd seen it since at the cinema. Like, what, two and a half years ago?
Yes.
For you?
I'd seen it a couple of times, but it has been a long time since I've seen it. It's the first time since its original release that I've seen it.
And I wanted a chance to sort of look at it again, remembering that I'd found the first two parts of it. It's split into three parts, Moonlight. And so, remembering that I'd found the first two parts of it fantastic, and the third less fantastic, and obviously you have got issues with the ending that we'll go into, we both wanted to kind of revisit that. So we'll talk about that first, I think.
Sure.
So spoilers for Moonlight and If Beale Street Could Talk are coming up. So I suppose... let's leave talk of the very ending for a little bit. What did you make of the film in general?
Well, I think it's really beautiful, and I was very touched. And actually, if anything, I think this current viewing brings the film up in my estimation. Really, I thought those sequences were just really beautiful and poetic, and it had kind of an energy. It was full of feeling, yeah?
Yeah.
So, for example, some things struck me even more this time around than originally. The conversation with Juan, with the Mahershala Ali character on the beach, right? Which kind of gives the film its title. The scene where he's teaching him to swim, and the music in that I found incredibly beautiful. The scene where his young friend is forced to betray him, and then he comes back into the classroom the next day and just takes a chair and smacks the guy.
Yeah, that's one of those moments.
That's
just
incredible.
You remember the moment.
Yeah. So all of that, the mother,
Naomi Harris.
Yeah, the being chased. I mean, I thought that was all incredibly beautiful. Actually, it lived up to. Well, it not only lived up to my memory of it, it was better than I remembered it.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree, I think. The moment where Chiron fights back and lashes out with the chair is incredible, and it's one of those moments, and I think it's a little bit like something that I talked about in the If Beale Street Could Talk podcast the first time about... You mentioned there being so little anger where there really needed to be some. You felt that it was missing some. And there's definitely an argument for that. But I think, on the other hand, the restriction of anger, and you see very little of it in Moonlight as well, means that moment is much more of a shock. It's much more charged. I think it really comes out of nowhere, and you feel the catharsis of it so viscerally. And, I mean, I don't think I've ever been more with a character than when he smashes the bully with the chair.
Yes.
And then also when the look that he gives, because then he's taken away by the cops actually.
Yeah,
and the look that he gives Kevin, his friend, for betraying him, and Kevin knowing that he's betrayed him, having done this hazing ritual where he's punched him in the face.
I think it's more complex than that.
Yeah.
Yes, I do, because I think. Chiron knows that his friend has no option but to do it. He also knows that his friend has been trying to protect him, right? He smacked him, but why doesn't he stay down?
Yeah. And
actually he says that, they're both in situations that are kind of forced on them, right? But, it's actually Chiron forcing his friend to do it again and again, yeah.
It is. I think that's there's an unspoken conversation going on in that scene between the two of them. The reason he's getting up is because I won't give in to the bullies, but he is by keeping on punching them. He also has the option to not take part in this ritual.
Yes, and
Kevin does.
Yeah, and be destroyed himself. So I think Kevin wants to play a game where you blow and you keep down and get out of it easily. And there's a stubbornness to Chiron at that point, which is also the moment that he blossoms into a kind of a personal strength. It's his moment of standing up to everything, really.
That's literally it. He's literally standing up for himself.
That's right. So that whole scene is more complex than, just... Is it Kevin?
Kevin's his friend, yeah.
Kevin beating him up or betraying him.
It is more complex than that, that's for sure.
And actually, I think that's kind of part of why the film resonates. And of course, it's also kind of the building block to the last third of the film.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is that I suppose it's something that I remembered about it, but I hadn't really put into words. Is there's a feeling somehow of kind of emptiness to the world in it. I think it's because most scenes in Moonlight have 2 or 3 characters maximum. You have scenes in the classroom, you have scenes sort of around the school, but for the most part, the scenes are almost like a minimalist kind of conversations between just a few people, and the world, in a way, kind of doesn't feel that rich because of it. Whereas in comparison to If Beale Street Could Talk, it's absolutely full of characters and locations and
I think the response to that is very simple.
Yeah.
Because, the Chiron character has no love throughout his life, really. He's alone. So, he gets the care and concern of Juan and his girlfriend. And that his mother deep down does love him, but, she's a drug addict and kind of she's a slave to her habit, and when her body propulses her to her need, he basically doesn't exist. So, part of his withdrawnness and so on is a kind of he's drawn in himself. Nothing exists outside of his own head, and every kind of excursion outside of that, aside from his friendship with Kevin, is a danger. There's a word for it. It's like, I forget what it is. I'm thinking atomism or something like that, but it's not quite that. It's, when somebody's like completely withdrawn into themselves.
Introverted, isolation.
Well, all of those are kind of a bit synonyms, but I'm thinking more than that. It's kind of like it's like a turtle. It's but more so, it's like if you're always kind of cut off. It's a kind of
right.
Yeah.
I don't know what the word is you're thinking of, but I think we get the point.
Yeah.
No, it's true, and it's not meant as a criticism, really. More of just a kind of observation. I think what Barry Jenkins is very good at in both films is bringing you into the mental state and the headspace of the main characters. Obviously, in If Beale Street Could Talk, it's very deliberately Tish's story that's being told by Tish, and that's narrated as well. So you get into other characters' headspaces, particularly Fonny's a little bit, but it's primarily Tish. As you said in the first podcast, I felt like I fell in love with, Fonny the same way that Tish did. I think it was evoked really beautifully, and I think the same thing is going on in Moonlight, though it's a little bit more indirect. It's not narrated at all, and actually Chiron says almost nothing a lot of the time. But that speaks to sort of that feeling of emptiness. Emptiness sounds like it's a negative, and it's not really. It's just, I think it is just a descriptor of.
But the person who's alienated from the world around him, and part of the reason why he's alienated and not connected to anything, is because, not only does he not feel loved, he actually feels oppressed and hated and chased, and so actually he's both afraid of the world. So he's afraid. Yeah, so simple as that. So let's get to the ending.
Yeah, let's talk about the ending. So there's one thing that I think would be useful to pick up on, or to kind of structure the talk of the ending, is when I watched it last night, because when I watched it the first time I didn't really pick up on problems with the ending, and it was only when you had described the various problems you had that I started to think about them. So when I watched the film again last night, it was really on my mind, and I think actually the problem with the ending is really twofold. I think it's partly the problem with the entire third act, in that I don't think Chiron is believable as a drug dealer, as you brought up before. Yeah. And I think the other problem is actually directly the final few shots where they're in Kevin's house. These are two slightly separate issues. Well, they are separate, but they are related.
Yes.
So do you want to sort of...
Well, they're separate insofar, as they're distinct.
Yeah.
But they're related insofar as, to me, it speaks of cowardice to represent homosexual love. Yeah. So I think you could have had the Chiron character as a drug dealer in the sense that, he's made to be a teetotaler and, very much in control of his body and, kind of, he only eats certain things. He doesn't take anything. Yeah, he's always in control. And he's always in control because, partly he's afraid of giving himself away, right? I guess, So I think you could have had him, there would have been a rationale, for someone so in control, so lucid, so, wanting to be controlling and so on. But I think it's impossible to have, a virgin be a drug lord.
Actually, the scene that I picked up on mostly in kind of not believing him as a drug dealer is the one in which they try and introduce him as a drug dealer, where he's with one of his sort of employees, and he's saying, "You're short on the money you brought back," and he's supposed to be getting quite threatening with him, and then it turns out he's fucking with him, and the point is to say, "I'm fucking with you because if you can't handle me fucking with you, all the guys on this corner are going to fuck with you as well." But I don't believe any part of that scene. Really, I don't believe the performance that Chiron is giving. I don't believe the performance that the actor is giving either. Really,
no,
it doesn't. It just doesn't.
The actor's not very good.
No, and I think the idea is just not very good. I just don't. I think I can totally believe Chiron at that age would be just as kind of introverted and a virgin, were he not a drug dealer. I can believe it.
No.
That's what I'm getting to. Like, if he was something else, I could totally believe he being who he is.
I mean, I just don't think you can be a drug dealer and be a virgin. It's. I mean, there he is with the crown in that car. Playing that music with the grill in his teeth, constantly exposed to sex and sexual situations, which are going to demarcate whether he can continue to be the kingpin of, this area. And I just...
There's a guy gets in the car with him and then says something like, "Where the girl's at?"
Yeah.
And he just doesn't answer in that way of like, I don't want to talk about it. But it just doesn't strike you as convincing at all.
Yeah. So I think you could have made him a drug pin if you'd made him sexual, because you could imagine that Chiron had undergone a transformation, right? So, I mean, he fought back. He ended up doing time, and then he ended up in a different city. He could have reinvented himself, right? And maintained the traits of withdrawnness, but, those traits kind of being turned into a kind of strength, right? But if you're in that world, I mean, I just didn't find that convincing. So there were two things, right? First, that I didn't find it convincing, and the film is telling you over and over again, right? Because they have the car, and the car has the crown, and the film is constantly reinforcing to you that he's the kingpin of all of this, right?
I think the reason that he's been made into a drug dealer is as a kind of filmmaker. It's a storytelling thing to compare him with Juan. I think from the start, and I do think that Juan is. If you don't believe Chiron as a drug dealer, which I think we both agree we really can't, you do have to have some issue with Juan, I think. He's more believable, but he is extremely sort of accepting and forward-thinking in some ways, and kind of takes Chiron kind of slightly under his wing in a way, and looks after him in the absence of his mum. And teaches him that you shouldn't let anyone call you a faggot, but it's okay to be gay. That's in that scene. And the turning Chiron into a drug dealer to kind of compare him to this what becomes a father figure at the start has a very artificial feel to it for me. It feels like something that a filmmaker has written in to try and be smart.
I agree, but there would have been a way of making it work because to me the Mahershala Ali character was believable. Yeah. Because it just kind of connotes, that black lives in the US are hard, that, things are complicated, that you can be a drug dealer and be a nice person and be a loving person, and that's just kind of the way that life falls for some people, right? And kind of, people are not born in the conditions of their own making, but kind of you have to make the best of what kind of life gives you, and and you can do that and be kind, I would have believed that, and I did believe that in the Mahershala Ali character. But then, it doesn't make sense to show Chiron be a drug dealer and not be at ease with his sexuality. Because actually, we've seen that before. We've seen it in The Wire, right? Like, you can be in that world and have that life and have kind of sexuality. And in some places, in some ways, it's at least kind of, it's no more difficult to do that than in other places, and certainly kind of a culture which is, accepting of all of the various ways that humans fail, right? Yeah. Would be accepting of that. So it's the cowardice around Chiron as an adult that makes one question that comparison. Yeah, that kind of, I think you could have, and actually you could have shown it as a sign of strength. Yeah, he's kind of, the kingpin because, he can defend his gayness in that world.
Yeah. But
that would have been a way of doing it.
Well, it does, as I said, it does feel artificial to me. It does feel like it's been engineered. The story's been engineered to do that. And to try and make that comparison, to try and make this sort of, well, not foreshadowing, but kind of callback in a way, and turning one character into another for this point of comparison. And whereas if you compare that to something, if you compare that to If Beale Street Could Talk, I think that everything the characters do and the ways they behave come completely organically from what you know about who they are and what you've seen of them. It doesn't feel like anything's been done in there because it would be good for the story or be interesting. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't feel like there's been a kind of controlling hand on anything in a way that I think it does a bit in Moonlight.
Yeah, I mean, I have mixed feelings because I do think the first 2/3 of Moonlight are to me much better than If Beale Street Could Talk. Because I think the third act just doesn't work at all. And then I felt really, really cheated, and I feel it even more strongly now after having watched If Beale Street Could Talk, where Chiron finally reconnects with Kevin, finds somebody for whom he's just as meaningful, who they've shared something, someone who he knows, right? And you're even denied a kiss, there's just a leaning, on the shoulder, and you think, why was that choice made? And I think it's a lack of courage in the filmmaker. I think he was afraid of alienating, a kind of, I imagine that the primary audience for this film was probably, a mainstream black audience, and he probably thought it would be homophobic and that they would be put off by a gay male kiss or a demonstration of affection, and that's why he didn't make that choice. He didn't have the courage of doing so. So actually that's what annoyed me so much about the film. And actually it wasn't so much the film itself, it was almost like that because it's a really important kind of black film by an incredibly talented filmmaker who's obviously a talent, and who's going to be doing things, people were just afraid to pick up on, what is clearly a fault. And in fact, I just called up Moonlight on IMDb because I wanted to be sure that I remember the names properly. And, the first review says something like... where is it now? Sorry, give me a second. User reviews. This is a telling commentary, and it's the first user review that comes up on IMDb. And it says, I want to nitpick the ending, but it's not yet time for that.
Right?
Okay. So it's, which I kind of...
Is that all it says?
No, it says, it continues, maybe I just wanted more, but that doesn't necessarily mean the film is at fault, but,
Yeah.
So, but the key sentence is, I want to nitpick the ending, but it's not time for... it's not yet time for that. Right? As if like this film for the moment is above criticism, right? It's so important, and it's so new in so many different ways, and blah blah blah. That let's not find fault with it now, which I think, So for me, the filmmaker lacked the courage to at least show love, to kind of, and to have that be physical in some way, like a kiss would have done, right? So the filmmakers lacked the courage to do that, and then the critical establishment lacked the courage to actually, bring that up in relation to the film. That is, a lack of courage. So actually, I think kind of both sets of structures. The filmmakers didn't fulfill their obligation or lack the courage of their convictions, and I think the critical establishment did the same,
I think part of why it's so important as well, I think you're right, it should be a kiss.
Yes.
You don't just see them in bed, you don't see them fucking, you just need to see a kiss between them. And that would really be the perfect way to end the film. And I think part of the reason that is so important is that although it's not shown directly, you see it from behind the two of them when they're sat on the beach together when they're teenagers, and Kevin masturbates Chiron. That is a moment of intimacy and a moment of physical touch. And in those last few lines of the film, that's exactly what Chiron brings up. Is he says that I've never really touched anyone since.
Yes.
Exactly. So the film foregrounds it completely at that point, and then just fades into this really anodyne shot. I felt exactly the same thing once I was really paying attention to it. Really anodyne shot of just the two of them, not really looking at anything, just Chiron's just being slightly cradled by Kevin, and then it goes into sort of a dreamlike imagery or flashback of Chiron on the beach when he was 6-7 years old. And you go...
Yes, it's like two grown men kissing.
It's such a cop-out.
Too transgressive.
I really did feel that.
Film.
Yeah. I agree with you.
And actually, seeing If Beale Street Could Talk brings up the point even more strongly. Because If Beale Street Could Talk is suffused with love. I mean, it begins, with this gorgeous shot of the couple coming into being together, and they're chic and they're holding hands and they look beautiful, right? The centerpiece of the film is really kind of the lovemaking scene, because... kind of, you see it from her point of view. It's all almost kind of like spiritual. It's all about feeling, right? Yet kind of the bodies are put into play, right? So you see his body full on display. Kind of, later on, kind of you see at least kind of her breasts, right? Though, it's kind of elegantly handled. Yeah, because kind of the focus is on feeling rather than... but the physicality is not removed from feeling, right? It's it's constantly negotiated, reassured, it's kind of a way of getting to togetherness. And actually, the carnality, the spirituality, the way that this becomes the center of the whole film kind of really puts Moonlight further into question. It does to me underline the cowardice and fear of a physical expression of love between men in the first film.
I agree, and also they share an element in that they're both about virginity.
Yes.
In a way, it's her first time.
That's
you
right.
find out afterwards.
That's right.
But it makes that kind of the noise she makes.
Yes.
Where finally he enters her, and it cuts.
Yes.
It's amazing. It's amazing anyway, and then that extra context that she reveals later. Did you know it was my first time?
Yes.
Makes it that much more meaningful. And of course, in Moonlight, it's all about that he's a virgin and he's only done this one intimate act with someone, and it kind of there should be something.
Yes,
at the end.
I mean, he's bloody been waiting for 10 years, right? So it does feel like a real cop-out. I want to bring up two things about If Beale Street Could Talk that I noticed, right? So kind of for me, one of the great pleasures of watching films, at least, one other time, is just that you notice mechanisms that you hadn't noticed the first time. And what I really noticed this time around was how brilliantly the film uses changes in focus. Yeah, kind of So sometimes actually the camera doesn't move, but actually the focus will rack and the accent will be on one person or the other person. The scenes with the family at the very beginning of the film are full of of quite slight, kind of changes in focus that I think kind of really enrich the film. It adds kind of like a dynamism within the frame of shift of attention between kind of one person to the other, which actually it maintains that device of kind of changing focus within the shot is part of the film's style and is maintained throughout.
And sometimes it's very noticeable as well.
Yes.
So the conversation between the two dads in the bar, the conversation between, is it Daniel, Brian Tyree Henry's character?
Yes.
And Fonny over the table. It's that conversation in particular starts off with it's not shot reverse shot, but it's cuts between the two of them, and then it goes to this moving camera that moves to Daniel, then back to Fonny, then to Daniel, and it's done in one take, and then it ends up with this shot where Fonny's in the background, Daniel's in the foreground, and the focus racks between them, and it's like the conversation has brought them together in this way, and then that shot is the kind of most emotionally charged part of that conversation. It's where Daniel is really internally reliving things that happened to him in prison that he doesn't speak about.
Where he says white people are the devil.
It's just after that, but it's in that conversation. And he actually doesn't say very much in that shot. He's really kind of he's looking basically into the distance. Not just he's in himself then. And it's done through the editing and the way the camera is used to gradually bring these characters together. It's wonderful.
The other thing that I noticed this time around, and which I think is important actually, I kind of, so the film in many ways is about the incarceration of black men. The first line in the film is something like, I hope you never get to see the person you love always constantly behind glass, or something like that.
It's the first narrated line.
Yeah, so, and then of course at the end we get all of these images of black men, being arrested or being brutalized or in work camps or, so it's not just, this is not just Fawn's story, it's a story of black men in America. But what I really loved about this film is that because of the structure of the film, where, things progress, but there's also a flashing back to constantly, right? And there's a flashing back to in different elements, really. So it feels like throughout the film, Fonny is always in prison, and Fonny and Tish are always in love, right? So this combination of always being imprisoned, always being in love, always having to struggle, always having to bring the family in, always being under threat by that policeman and so on, it's kind of, it lends kind of a sense of time in which all of these aspects of, what is part of, a condition under which kind of black masculinity is lived in the States, it kind of it brings them all together. It makes them all kind of be at one. And I think what is lovely and beautiful about this film is that, along with the oppression of black men, which is a structural oppression, in which the film shows you how that oppression is structural, how kind of black men are in prison, right, and how that's not the fault of this crime or that crime, it's a structural kind of problem in America. But along with that, there's also love and resilience and family and grace, which I think is beautiful. And actually I think that's something that the structure kind of brings to it, that these things are coexistent in time.
It's well, I think it's well put, the idea of Fonny being in prison throughout, because basically all the time that you see him being free is effectively in flashback, and I mean, I said in the first podcast that the two stories kind of run concurrently, and they don't actually. I've noticed the second time. The flashbacks are, they do pick and choose, they jump about in the past. Which I think gives it more of a kind of, it makes it clearer than I realised the first time that this is one structuring story that flashback kind of informs.
Well, I think it's a beautiful thing that the film does, because it does bring in oppression, but also it brings in community. It does bring up injustice. It also brings up love.
I suppose those are the areas that those two sequences that you picked up on, where you're shown a montage of photographs of police brutality and people being incarcerated and guys in prison, all that sort of thing. Because we had a problem with the title the first time round, and I still have that problem with the title of it, trying to indicate a universality of experience that I don't think the film is actually communicating. But in those moments it is, and it's reaching
I think it is. I actually do think that so I still have problems with the last line, right? So, the title begins something like, Louis Armstrong and my father were born on Beale Street. There's a Beale Street in every street in America. Yeah, we all have to talk about the impossibility and the necessity of speaking about that experience. And that experience is one of the incarceration of black men, and kind of, and the problem of what it is to be a man in a culture that doesn't let you be one, right? And kind of those shots of, Fawny being unable to defend himself and his anger around that. And actually the film does kind of make it a general condition in America. That's why you have the opening line, I hope you never get to see the man you love always behind glass or whatever. And that's why you get all of those pictures, which actually I had misremembered because, I thought they happened more halfway through the film, where actually it's right at the very end.
And right at the start as well, there's a series right at the start.
Yeah. So, so the film is very much kind of trying through this individual story to talk about the story of, black men in America, or black men being jailed in America and so on. So I think it does succeed in doing that. What I think it doesn't succeed in doing was the question of the drums.
Yeah.
I think
it's funny how I noticed actually now the film starts off with that quote and it ends up with it's the sound of drums, and then strings start.
Exactly.
And they're like, and the strings are happening over the word drums.
I know.
And it's really dissonant actually. And the only time you hear any drums is when someone puts on a record.
Yeah.
And the soundtrack is beautiful.
The soundtrack
makes me want to cry.
And don't get me wrong, I love the music.
But you're completely right that it's totally dissonant.
And actually, I think you could have suffused the film with love, which is really so beautiful to see, and also made anger a kind of a component of that. I mean, Baldwin always did, so I do feel that is something that is missing in the film.
I agree with that, and actually I'm still really in love with the film, and particularly the first half, 2/3 of it, I think in some ways are like a really great hangout movie. I know it's dealing with some really harsh stuff, and you're kind of seeing characters going through some very tough times, particularly when Daniel comes around and has dinner with them. He's talking about some very, very difficult things, reliving them in his mind. And the line, I just remembered the line that where it's that rack focus shot, is he's saying the worst thing about it is they can make you so fucking scared.
Yes.
And he just kind of trails off and repeats, and he takes such a long time to, and he's just it's amazing. Yet I think there is something I like to live with these characters. I like to literally hang out with these characters. So it's not in the same way as like a Richard Linklater movie does it, where it's just like they live these consequence-free lives in those movies where they're just smoking. Like people are talking about real things and having real conversations, but they're also deeply in love, and they deeply care for each other, and they care about their families, and you get these lines that just express it, like when Tiana Paris, the sister character, says "Unbow your head, sister."
Yes, that's the line to remember.
Exactly.
It'll.
And so I can sort of imagine myself revisiting this like someone would revisit Dazed and Confused or something like that.
I think there are moments that are just extremely beautiful that, and it's a very poetic film, so kind of that moment was when he's in jail, but he's in a studio and he's smoking and he's just looking at that piece of wood and kind of, what'll come out of that, right? And then you hear that his dream is like to build a table where all his family can eat, right? I mean, the images and the smoke and the lighting and so on. I mean, it is just kind of very beautiful to look at. The scene where he finally realizes that he's not going to get the help he needs to get out of jail. Yeah, that kind of, and it's not just that this focus goes off, it goes out of focus, but also the image kind of swirls, and there's something that's dissolved and lost and so on, right? I mean, I think kind of the film is full of beautiful things like that.
He kind of dissolves into prison.
Yeah.
And then the next time we see him, it's 3 or 4 years later, and they've got a kid there. And,
yeah. So I think all of that, I like and admire very much. I think some of my problems with the film are still there, and actually I think they've become more acute. Yeah, they've come more into view by seeing Moonlight again, because I think, so of the many problems that the last third of Moonlight has, one of them is the performance of Chiron. Yeah. The actor just isn't good enough. And actually he's got that same kind of stilted way of, saying very little that actually Tish has. You can actually almost compare the performances. It's the same style of performance, right? And I think actually the director has to take some of the blame for that.
I think that's probably true. I think that's also true to a lesser extent, but also to an extent, of Stephen James, who plays Fonny. He's more expressive, but still, I think all the actors around them bring much more expression.
Fantastic.
But they bring much more expression
Yes.
to what they're doing, and they build much richer characters, I think.
Yes.
And I think around Tish and Fonny, it's storytelling and camera work and editing that's doing the work, and lighting particularly. I mean, the cinematography is just... We should look at the cinematographer's name, actually, because he definitely deserves to be mentioned.
Though actually he deserves to be mentioned, but no, I don't think with wholehearted praise.
Really?
No. I think there are moments where he kind of lets down the actors, that kind of, you have incredibly beautiful people, and actually they're often made not to look so good for no real reason whatsoever.
James Laxton is the cinematographer.
Okay, well,
he also did Moonlight.
I have issues to pick with him, because, one of the things that really struck me, so we're talking about all the supporting actors, really, right, and, how alive they are, and some of them are, like, Tish's parents, Regina King, and I forget the name of the father, are fantastic.
Coleman something.
Yeah.
Coleman Domingo.
Yeah. Terrell.
Brian Tyree Henry. If you love him so much, you're going to have to learn his name eventually.
I know. I'm sorry. Brian Tyree Henry is kind of a genius, really. I mean, he walks into the frame and he brings a world with him. It's really quite extraordinary to see. But, and this is where I blame the director, right? So, because, I mean, I think last time you praised him very much for his focus on faces and the humanity and whatever. But actually, if you look at Diego Luna, and is it Paco?
Pedro Pascal.
Pedro Pascal. I mean, those are brilliant actors, and they're very charismatic actors, and they're not well lit, they're not kind of shown to advantage, I mean, so Diego Luna comes and he's charming, but he looks like terrible, and I just didn't understand that. I mean, he's a waiter, he's a friend. Why can't you envelop him in the same kind of romantic glow, right? Like, his hair is all stringy, and you think, why? Right? And, Pedro Pascal, he's one of the most beautiful men in the movies, right? And you're showing him like that. And actually, I think, if there are other takes of, what he offers, they should have been chosen. So again, he's somebody who kind of imbues the character with life, but you've seen him much better and shown to much greater advantage. And I think the director could have shown them off to better advantage.
You think it's a little lazy, maybe, or not enough care has been taken,
or he's just.
I think performances are great. I mean, what you say about other takes? I think Pedro Pascal's performance is.
No, I think it could have been better. There were words that were too rushed together sometimes, and he's got that sickly look, right?
Yeah,
which is completely unnecessary.
Well, the look I kind of agree on, actually, but not the performance. I think, I bought him completely. He's in it for one scene, and it's a short scene, and you get everything about him and how he wants to protect. I don't know if it's his sister or his girlfriend or what relationship they have, but you get completely, sort of how much he wants to protect and how little he wants to be and how little time he wants to give to the mother, because she can only basically bring pain to her.
I mean, I won't quibble too much, right?
Yeah.
Because I think he is very good. But, he is also Pablo Pascal. I've seen him, kind of be better and more charismatic and, and I think I've seen him be better.
He's Pedro Pascal, not Pablo Pascal.
Pedro Pascal, right? So I think actually those two Hispanic actors, which he is trying to make a case for, right? Like, the film is structured, it's a very, very intelligent film. It's structured to bring in Italian Americans and Jews and Hispanics and Puerto Ricans, all to be part of, this mosaic that is kind of masculinity in America, in which this film has kind of a focus on blackness, right? But in which kind of all of these other, subaltern peoples figure, right? And of course, at the head of that and as the height of evil is the Caucasian policeman, really. So the film is very smart about doing that. Well, kind of, why not let those Hispanic actors kind of look better and shine better? It's a minor point, but I observed it.
Well, it's your right to. And I suppose how lovely that they showed a Jew.
Yes, though actually, again,
I really kind of don't believe him, and I thought about this the first time in that he's Dave Franco. Like, all I see is Dave Franco in him, really.
Oh, I didn't see Dave Franco at all. I didn't realize it was him.
He is Dave Franco. So.
I didn't notice it. Actually.
Whereas actually, it struck me that, again, I keep on coming back to Daniel, but Brian Tyree Henry, I look at him and I know perfectly well it's Brian Tyree Henry. It's a mark of a great actor that I just get into the character immediately.
Oh, he's in a whole other league. I think he's,
Whereas Dave Franco, in that respect, stood out in a way that actually someone like Pedro Pascal didn't.
Yeah.
He's.
I didn't.
Or Diego Luna.
I didn't recognize him as David Franco, actually. So thank you for telling me. But I did think that the film was so heavy-handed in the way that it introduced him. Yeah, it introduced him with the capel, before you see the face or before you know anything about him, he's a Jew, right? Which I kind of.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with that. And you get to see him fairly quickly. And
yeah, well, I didn't like that. Kind of, it's. Yeah, I mean. I wonder what part of a thinking process is, because, I mean, there could be a very good reason for it. So, for example, every time kind of you see a character in a movie that's black, it's almost like you see the blackness before the character in a way that, is not true of, when you see white actors. So maybe the director's trying to do something with that. I don't know.
Well, we did speak on the previous podcast, and you were quite complimentary about the way in which the film gives you senses of other worlds that people live in through just a shot or two.
Yes.
So you see the white lawyer, for instance, and you just get 3 or 4 shots of his kind of him in a sort of smoking lounge or something with his superiors, and how he's just kind of doesn't really fit in there. And you don't really need to see any more than that. He's not in the film very much anyway, but you get the sense of his world. And as you said, the old woman who came across to me Jewish as well.
Yes.
Who runs the store.
Yes.
And you got the sense of her, as you said, having grown up in a shtetl and going over here and fled here. I think showing the Dave Franco character, his name's Levy, which is a perfectly good indication as well of his Jewishness.
Sure.
But showing his capel first off is a shorthand.
Sure.
But I don't think it's kind of... it didn't strike me as something that was really unwarranted. Or
I just found it heavy-handed, because that's the first thing you see about him, and then the shot continues and you just see his back, right? And it lasts about, I don't know, 5 or 10 seconds. I mean, they go up the stairs, right? And all you see about him is his back and the capo, you know. So I thought it was a bit too much.
Okay.
But
there was something I noticed about eyes in the film, and this was only really a minor thing, but I really picked up on it. And again, I'm going to go back to the scene with Daniel, because that's where I noticed it. Is he has these shots where he and Fonny are sitting at the table talking and smoking, and when they're talking about his having been in prison, and he's talking about the stuff they can do to you and how the white man is the devil, he looks, his face doesn't move, but he looks like kind of extremely to his right, to the camera's left, and so you see redness at the back of his eyes.
Yes.
And the only other time you see redness in someone's eyes is towards the end, when you see Fonny behind the glass in prison, having been involved in a fight, and one of his eyes is half bloodshot, really deeply bloodshot.
Yes. Actually, and I love how nothing about that fight is mentioned in the scene. It's just, you see it in his face, but nothing is said. Yeah. That's lovely.
And it just struck me that's the only 2 times you see that, and I think that kind of related, because I think it struck me as something, as kind of connoting something about the scars that prison leaves on people, and how, I mean, those two characters aren't the only 2 that have been in prison. I think the dads talk about it a little bit, and they mention it, and you don't see it in them, I don't think, but there's something about the kind of, because on the one hand, redness in the eyes, the way that Fonny has it, connotes injury, and the way that Daniel has it connotes tiredness and kind of weariness, and it's as though kind of in prison it's foregrounded, and having left prison, it's just always going to be there in the back of your eyes. I think, I don't, like, you can't ever say like how deliberate that is, but it really struck me. You really see, no other character looks at another character the way that Daniel does that with his eyes, and you notice it really deeply, and that felt really, it felt meaningful to me.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because what I loved about that scene was the way that the actors were lit. So there are moments in the film where their faces almost go dark. Yeah, so they're like, and what you see is their eyes and the outline of their lips, and and I thought it was almost like a kind of, it was like almost, I don't know, like the camera showing their souls or something, that, or their spirit, because there was a relative absence of light, so that their skins faded into the darkness, as even the outlines of their lips, their teeth, and their eyes came out and became sharpened. It was almost like kind of they were speaking through each other, kind of with an intimacy that that is rendered kind of, or communicated visually, but it's an internal kind of communication, really.
There's something that I felt about that scene the first time, which I didn't say in the first podcast, which is that when it's better to me the second time, because the first time I saw that scene, when he first actually bumps into Daniel on the street and then brings him back to the apartment, I was suspicious of Daniel, until it became clear later on in that scene that Daniel was literally just an old friend, and he was happy to see him. I was suspicious that he was going to try and scam or rob.
Yes, because that's
Fonny.
That's what you expect of Brian Tyree.
I just thought it's rather like, if you remember the second Widows podcast that we did with Lee Kemp, he talked about, and again this is something that I felt and didn't say the first time, the scene in Widows in which Michelle Rodriguez goes to the architect's husband's house and discovers that she's passed away and her facade falls apart, and then she starts crying on the sofa, because then it kind of brings up that she's lost someone. And Lee talked about how the first time he saw that, he wondered whether she was doing something, whether she was playing something when she started crying, until it became clear that no, she was just for real. And so I think that I felt the same thing in this as I did in that scene in Widows, and I don't know if that's unfair, or if it, because the scene was definitely better the second time. Once I knew from the very beginning that Daniel was just for real, and when you see him come in the door and he's grinning, and it both made us laugh, that big open grin he has, he's not kind of covering anything up, which I kind of feared the first time.
Yes.
It's a better scene for me the second time.
So actually there's a corollary between that scene and the scene of betrayal in Moonlight. Because if you remember, in that scene, he is the witness that the rape couldn't have possibly taken place. Yeah, but the police coerce him so that he can't make that statement because he's already got a previous record.
Yes, that's right. The lawyer talks about that, doesn't he?
Yeah. So the scene the second time around is also kind of overhung with this real friendship, this real intimacy, and also this this acknowledgement of how terrible things are, and this inability to help make it better, and in fact actually to make it worse. So, and I think in that sense it does have kind of a corollary with the scene in Moonlight. Yeah,
that's true. And again, I think the complexity that you were talking about around that part of Moonlight exists here as well, because on the one hand it's kind of betrayal, like he could say something that would support Fonny. On the other hand, who's going to believe him really? And he also talks about in that conversation scene, he talks about how the police can do absolutely anything they want to you, and so it would be a symbolic act.
Yeah, you can't do much. Yeah,
the
sense of powerlessness.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's wrap it up.
Yeah. So I'm really glad I saw it a second time, and I'm glad I watched Moonlight again as well. And I ultimately think this is a superior film to Moonlight.
Yes, I think so too.
But I like them both, and I'm glad that we talked out kind of the issues around that final third of Moonlight, because they've been sort of in the back of my head for a while, and every time you bring them up, I'm like, oh, we really need to.
Yes,
because you bring them up more than most endings of films.
Well,
as you might.
I think. Well, it bothered me for all kinds of reasons, the ending, and really part of the reason why it bothered me so much is because other people weren't making that call. And also, when you did make that call, many who had not seen the film, it must be said, were doing ridiculous things. Oh, well, kind of, you don't have to have a sex scene in every film, or, kind of, why can't you show somebody being a very, the kinds of arguments that you could just make abstract because you actually haven't seen the film and you can't speak about the specifics. And it was annoying me no end, right? Because, of course, you can make a film about anything, and you can make a film about any kind of person. So you can't talk about these things without talking about the specifics, right? Of this particular film in this particular way, kind of. So so it's been like an itch.
Yeah, it's good to scratch it.
Yeah. And that's a very good way to end the podcast. Thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies is the Twitter account, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening.
Bye bye.
Okay, excellent.